In this video, we're going to go over voxel sculpting and surface mode sculpting in 3D Coat's Sculpt Workspace. You'll notice that when you open the application, by default, you're in the Paint workspace. However, when you click on voxel sculpting or surface sculpting and choose one of these options here, whether you want to start with a blank scene, import an object, or open a 3D Coat file, or use one of these presets as a starting point, it will launch you into the appropriate workspace for that task, which is the Sculpt workspace. I'm going to open up a scene that will help me demonstrate what voxels are and how they work. In 3D Coat, it's going to turn on and turn off individual voxels, and it uses an adaptive outer mesh that will look like this. The user will never see the actual voxels, but let me do a simple cutting operation here. And you can see how that works. It's all volume, and at any point in time you can switch between voxel and surface mode. Let me undo that. If you were to scale an object, scale it along a single axis, you can see how these little cubes or these voxels are stretched. That needs to be rectified at some point, probably sooner rather than later, because when you go to use different brush alphas and maybe stencils and things of that sort, you're going to get undesirable results if you continue. With that said, how would we go about rectifying this? So let me demonstrate this on the second layer. I'll zoom in, turn wireframe on with my W key, and when I scale along an axis, you can see how that stretches those polygons, and it also stretches the voxels as well. And this will also occur in surface mode, and you'll see this little red warning at the bottom of the user interface in the status bar. So you can right click and choose global space. Now when I zoom in, you can see they're all uniform, and I no longer see that warning at the bottom. I'll hide that and unhide this one. When you start with a large scale, it's basically the same concept as starting with a large document in Photoshop. Let me go ahead and step on over into Photoshop to illustrate this. I'm already at 100% and it's a relatively small document. So let's go to the image menu under image size. You can set the size and the resolution here, and you obviously would want to do that early before you start doing any work so that you don't lose any resolution. The same thing applies in 3D Coat. If you start with a very small object without increasing the dots per inch, if you will, or basically voxels per unit, then you're not going to have enough resolution to do any high detail work. What we can do, if we wanted to make sure as we were painting that we had enough resolution, we would obviously scale this up. So let's go maybe 2K. Okay. So at 100%, you can see how that looks. Let's go back. Image size. The other option is to increase the resolution or the dots per inch. 3D Coat is the same way. You can increase the dots per inch in 3D Coat by clicking the increase resolution icon at the bottom of the Voxel True Layer panel, as we'll see momentarily. But the other thing I could do, if I need to keep the document size, let's say inches, letter size document or something of that sort, I may need to bump the resolution up to 300 dpi. Hit OK. I'll get a similar result. So let's see how this works in 3D Coat. I'll hide this object. Let's create a new layer. I'm going to leave it just as it is, and I'll go to the Primitives tool and click on the cube, and we'll scale it down quite a bit. Sometimes you're going to work on objects that are going to be relatively small, such as bolts, screws, rivets, secondary objects on a character, like bracelets, buttons, things of that sort. They're going to be relatively small, but you can't afford to lose a lot of resolution. So let's hit apply and make sure add is selected here in the tool options panel. So I'll step out by selecting any other tool, and now I can see the result. It's very low resolution and not even enough to give me that crisp edge that I had on the primitive. So I will clear the object from this layer by clicking this X icon at the bottom of the Voxtree layer panel, and we'll try again. So when you're working with voxels and voxels alone, scale is important. Think of it in terms of document size. Now, if I hit apply, you'll see it takes a little bit longer actually for it to calculate, and I'll see the poly count here. It'll probably be in the millions. Yes, 7 million, almost 8 million. So I'll step out, and we have extremely crisp edges. Okay? Big difference, just in scaling alone. All right. Now, if I scale down, it's the same thing as adding dots per inch. You see how it did that on its own? So I'm going to undo that. See the difference on the layer? It no longer has it times 2. So I'll go ahead and clear this again. Let's go back to the primitives tool. I'll scale it down a bit. Hit apply. It's kind of a medium-high resolution, as you can see. If I wanted to do some intermediate level sculpting, this would probably be a good resolution. I'll clear that one more time. I'll click on primitives once again for one last example. I'll scale it down. This time I'm going to click increase resolution quite a few times, and you can see it change accordingly. The smaller the scale, the higher the number you need if you want to maintain any kind of detail or sharp edges. Let's go ahead and hit apply. You can see our poly count here. It's about 2.5 million. Let's zoom in. Hit our W key for wireframe. Looks good. We'll now turn our focus towards surface sculpting and modeling, and I'm going to start from a blank scene here. In the models palette, I just chose a personal folder. I'll click on the model to center mass, and I'll click the X to bring it to the origin. I want to make sure that my layer has the S next to it that's in surface mode. If not, just click on it. If it shows a V, then you know that layer is a voxel layer. I'll hit apply. 3D Coat's going to prompt and ask if I want it to remember the scene scale. In this case, no. Let's step out and look at our model. I have wireframe turned on, and you can see this one is more or less a game model. It's not really optimized for subdivision. If it were, we'd see chamfered edges. So this can be a bit problematic bringing a model like this into the scene, but as you notice, surface mode is entirely different than voxels because it's strictly geometry. Whatever the model looks like in your host application, that's what it's going to look like when it comes in as surface mode. Let's clear this layer, and I want to show one way that you could approach it. You have the option to subdivide before you actually apply it to your layer here. But if I do that, you'll see the same problem that you would see in any standard 3D application. This model was not prepped for subdivision, and this is what you'll get. So I'm just going to click on the model again and it will restore it. Let's choose flat subdivision because this is just going to give me more geometry, but it's not going to apply any smoothing or curvature. Okay, I'm going to hit apply. And I'll step out into another tool so we can see the result. Turn wireframe off. Now, because this model was not prepped, then we'll see a little bit of faceting because this environment does not apply viewport smoothing like you typically have in a 3D application. If we want to work on this model further, we probably want to even out the topology because the irregularity that we see is going to prove to be problematic. We can evenly distribute the polygons by hitting the Enter key to temporarily voxelize the object and remesh it. There we go. We could smooth this further, but we're going to stop right here and pick it up in the next video looking at another example.